Welcome to today's webinar, COVID-19 and the Future of Planning, hosted by the Maryland Department of Planning in association with the Smart Growth Network. My name is Michael Bayer. I'm the Manager of Infrastructure and Development at the Maryland Department of Planning and Project Manager for the Smart Growth Information Clearinghouse. The Smart Growth Information Clearinghouse is a project of the Smart Growth Network, which is supported by the U.S. EPA's Office of Community Revitalization and is managed by the Maryland Department of Planning. In addition to hosting webinars, the Smart Growth Information Clearinghouse has a website, smartgrowth.org, that provides current information on effective growth, development, and preservation practices. The website provides news and information about events, funding opportunities, awards, and resources to help local decision makers foster healthy, resilient, and economically vibrant communities. The Clearinghouse is also the virtual home of the Smart Growth Network, a nationally recognized coalition of leadership organizations that have formally endorsed the principles of smart growth. This webinar is one in a series of webinars produced by the Maryland Department of Planning on smart growth and planning topics available for viewing at smartgrowth.org. Today's program is the second offering of Planning with Purpose, a Smart Growth Network webinar series on community revitalization. In this series, the Smart Growth Network is sharing new ideas and approaches taken from current planning issues and case studies that have made us aware of the need to broaden our smart growth lens. We want to share and learn with you and from you with the hope that together we can create communities of the future that are healthy, equitable, and resilient for everyone. We are recording this webinar and will post it on our website early next week under the Webinar Archives tab. We encourage you to visit the website and to subscribe to our e-newsletter to get smart growth news and information and to learn about our upcoming webinars. You can also learn about planning initiatives, planning tools, and educational opportunities in Maryland by visiting the Maryland Department of Planning's website at planning.maryland.gov. The views expressed by the speakers in this webinar today are those of the speakers and not necessarily of the Maryland Department of Planning or the state of Maryland. Viewers of this live event are eligible to receive 1.5 CM credits from the American Planning Association and 1.5 CNUA CEU self-reported credits from the Congress for the New Urbanism. To log your AICP credits, visit the American Planning Association's website at planning.org, log into your account, and search for the name of today's event, which is COVID-19 and the Future of Planning. You can also search for event number 9203632. So to get started, our speakers today are Petra Hurtado and Joe Peña. Petra Hurtado is the research director at the American Planning Association. She is responsible for expanding APA's future-focused research agenda and advancing current and future planning practices that assist communities in navigating change. Her areas of expertise and research include urban sustainability, smart cities, emerging technologies, nature-based solutions, and environmental psychology. Prior to joining APA, Petra worked as an advisor, planner, researcher, and educator in the global urban sustainability arena. She has a PhD in urban planning from the Vienna University of Technology, where she teaches on urban sustainability and environmental psychology. She has authored and co-authored multiple books, research papers, publicly funded reports and articles, and has presented as a subject matter expert at numerous conferences around the world. Joe Peña is a research associate at APA, where she provides support on projects related to environmental planning, climate resiliency, social equity, and community engagement. She contributes to initiatives that focus on interdisciplinary collaboration, plan a response to emerging issues, and member interest groups. Joe has contributed to APA's research knowledge base, creating curated collections of topically related resources to support planners. She holds a BS in environmental science and a BA in sociology from the University of South Florida. And she's currently working toward completing a master's in urban planning and policy at the University of Illinois at Chicago, specializing in environmental planning. Following their presentations, Petra and Joe will answer as many questions as time permits. You can submit a question anytime during their presentation by using the questions tool in the control panel located on the right side of your screen. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to both Petra and Joe to get started. Welcome.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks for having us. We're very excited to be here today and to speak about our COVID-19 response and as well as our foresight research approach. We would like to start for the audience, and we prepared some polls for that.
Hi everyone, my name is Peña. We are, as Petra mentioned, going to kick it off with some polls to get a better understanding of who's in our audience today. So with that, I'll turn it over to John and Michael to help us share this poll with participants.
Okay, so the first one is up on the screen. You can see that basically showing where you're located. If you're having problems, I'm not sure, we're doing it in a webcast mode today, so the full screen mode might not be a problem, but if you are having problem responding to it, you may need to exit that. And we'll give you a few more seconds to respond. You can see the answers coming in. And we'll close it momentarily. And you'll see that we have a very good distribution of our audience today, 34% in the Northeast, 22% in the South, 21% in the West, 17% in the Midwest, and 6% outside of the US.
Thank you for that. Yeah, it's exciting to see that we have folks joining us from a little bit of everywhere. Some of the issues that we'll talk about today are, going to span across things that we're seeing in the US and maybe also touch on global trends that we're seeing. So for the next question, this is more specific towards your area of specialization. The question is, what is your profession?
Yes, and the poll is up on the screen. So we have selected a number of possibilities, and there's also an other category if you don't fall into one of those other four: planner, architect, real estate, landscape architect. And it's always interesting when we do these webinars to see who is in the audience, because it does vary quite a bit from program to program. And again, if you're having issues with responding, you may need to exit from this full screen mode. And I think that it'll be very interesting when this opens, because it's, I think, a much more planner heavy group than we usually have anecdotally.
Oh, wow.
So 79% of our audience today are planners, 16% other, 2% architect, 2% landscape architect, and 1% real estate.
That will make our lives as planners easier to talk about what we usually talk about.
Very true. And then folks who are overlapping, hopefully we have things that we can learn from one another and how to address some of the challenges that we're seeing right now and into the future. We have one last poll question for you all, which is more future oriented, trying to get a sense for where our heads are at when we do talk about the future.
Okay, so it's opened here. What do you feel about when you think about the future? 5 options. Selecting 1, I'm motivated. I see lots of good things on the horizon. 2, I think I'm prepared for what's to come. 3, I don't have any specific feelings about the future. 4, I'm apprehensive and feel challenged by uncertainty. And 5, I'm pessimistic. We'll give everybody a couple more seconds, and I think you'll be launching into your presentation after this.
As Petra and I are particularly interested in seeing where we are in terms of tackling whatever comes next. Definitely been a challenging last couple of months, but looking forward, we'll see what happens.
Okay, here we see that 41% are apprehensive and feeling challenged by uncertainty. 28% are motivated and see lots of good things. 13% I think I'm prepared for what's to come. 10% I don't have any specific feelings, and 9% are pessimistic.
That's a good mix of everything.
Agreed. And, when we were preparing for this presentation, we were thinking about, okay, well, what's likely to happen, based on everything that we've experienced in the last couple of months. And apprehension is completely understandable. There's been so much change just the last several weeks even, or every day when we wake up it's different. But hopefully today we get to talk about some things that make it easier or perhaps increase our level of comfort when discussing the future. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and switch it over to Petra so that we can talk more about the future.
Thank you, Jill. And, it's also not a surprise that the majority feels a little bit apprehensive about the future because uncertainty never feels good. We don't know what's going to happen next week. We don't know what's going to happen next month. And we definitely don't know what's going to happen next year. And obviously that makes people feel uneasy about the future. So looking at the current times, the future is really more unknowable than ever before. It's not just that the only constant is change. That's something that's, been a thing for a while, but it's really about the pace of change that has been accelerating over the last decades already. And that requires faster adaptation to technological innovation, demographic shifts that we are experiencing, a changing climate, and now it seems like things are accelerating even more with COVID-19. So from a planner's perspective, obviously COVID-19 has turned cities and communities upside down. And it also changed how we as planners are doing our work. And the questions that we need to ask ourselves right now are really, what if everything we're doing right now is going to be a temporary fix? And what can be a permanent, sustainable solution? And I always like to quote the mayor from Milan, Giuseppe Sala, who said a while ago in a webinar, he asked the question, is COVID-19 a rehearsal for what's to come, meaning climate change, social inequality, and other challenges we are dealing with? So taking a step back, why are we talking about COVID-19 and the future of planning today? And I always like to use these two quotes for this conversation when I try to explain what planners actually do. And the first one is by Charlie Hoke, professor at UIC, who wrote the book, What Planners Do. And he's saying, planners compose and offer advice on preparing for an uncertain future. And then the second quote is by Tim Keene, the planning director of the city of Atlanta, who said last year in a meeting, planners help communities navigate change. So obviously planners are dealing a lot with the future and with future uncertainties in their communities. And at APA, we were wondering, how can we support planners better in that work and also improve what we are doing at APA? With that goal in mind, we started a foresight practice at APA last year. And so the goal is really to develop a process with our staff and elected leaders to wrap our minds around what the future may look like and how we can prepare for it. The process itself is still a work in progress, but we are obviously excited to share some of the pieces with you today. Obviously, we're still learning a lot about this, how to do this, and we're constantly refining and improving along the way. So if you have, some input here today for us as well, we are obviously welcoming that. Okay, well, let's dive into that approach. So here you can see our so-called time cone or trend radar. And so when you look at the very left, that's where we are today, and then moving towards the right, that's where we move into the future. And then within this cone that you can see here, there's multiple trends that we are looking at. And so you see also 3 time frames here. The very left in the today time frame is the act time frame. So that's where we are today. That's what we're doing already. Those are our current actions. Now, moving towards the right, a little further into the future, more a medium-term future, this is where we have trends that we can already prepare for. Those are things that are not currently as important, but we already need to start preparing for them. And then the further out we move into the future, we move into our watch and learn time frame, which is really about trends that we don't know yet what they might mean. We don't know how they might relate to planning, but we need to start watching them and learning about them. Now, in addition to those three time frames, we have three lenses for our foresight practice. One lens is the cities and communities lens, really looking at what are all these future trends meaning for cities and communities. The second lens is the planning profession lens. So what does it mean for how we do our work as planners? And the third lens is the lens for APA as an organization in our operational environment. For the presentation today, we will be focusing on the cities and communities lens as well as the planning profession lens. And obviously, we will be focusing on COVID-19 related trends and disruptions. Now, let's look into this, how this looks in practice. So using our APA Foresight approach for our current COVID-19 situation. So this graph essentially comes from last March when COVID hit here in the US. And you see the two lenses on the left and then the three time frames towards the right. So the emergency response for us at APA was we realized that there are some pain points our members, mainly planners, are experiencing in their work and pain points communities are experiencing. And so our emergency response for that was to form a COVID-19 solutions team to share knowledge and solutions with our members on a weekly basis. And Joe will talk about that a little more in a little bit. Now, looking at the next time frame, we adjusted the prepare time frame to this interim transition phase until we have a vaccine. That's essentially where we're in right now. And the question that we have to answer here is, how will it change in communities, how people live, work, and play and move around, and what will be temporary and what will be permanent? And then, of course, how does that impact the planning profession? And then moving further into the future, the watch and learn frame becomes really the question of the future new normal. How will everything change after COVID once we have a vaccine? And so Joe will start with diving into what we did in the emergency response.
Thank you, Petra. So we're going to be talking about APA activities, member responses, and some solutions that we've seen come up during this time. But before we do that, we are going to take it back just a little bit and talk about the more personal component of this time of transition. As many of you all noted, this has been apprehensive, or the future feels very apprehensive right now. And I know personally for myself, I've been trying to cope with all of the different changes and uncertainties by doing lots of different things. I definitely joined the baking bandwagon during this time, started growing some plants. I even built myself a standing workstation complete with a footrest and yoga block. And you know, some of these things were things that I had within my control, and so they gave me comfort in moving forward. I've also observed lots of different changes in my community. Some of them are positive. There's a mural that went up in my community that says we're all in this together, and it serves as a reminder of, even though we're socially distant or physically distant, like I've heard some folks say, we are all still trying to move beyond where we are right now into a place where we are recovering from current circumstances. I've also included a picture here of some of the spatial changes I've observed in my community. Specifically, if any of you all are familiar with Lakeshore Drive, there was one time when I was able to take a walk in the middle of the day, and I observed that Lakeshore Drive, which is a major roadway that goes along Lake Michigan, was shut down. There were demonstrations taking place in our urban core, and so the city of Chicago took action to try to adapt to some of the changes that they were seeing in the environment. And so we'll talk a little bit more about COVID and some of the social justice, social equity considerations that our team has been dealing with. But before we do that, we have another poll for you all. We're curious to know about what are some of the changes that have impacted you the most personally over the last several months.
Okay, we have opened up the poll. You can see the question there. What changes have impacted you the most in your personal life over the last several months? And you have 5 responses. And if you're having an issue with responding to it, do exit from the full screen mode. We have been getting a couple of comments about some technical issues. We're not noticing it here, but if you are having some issues, you can let us know in the comments box. So we'll close this momentarily. Okay, so you can see that 46% work, school from home, most changes there, 25% the consistent uncertainty, 20% health and safety concerns, 6% changes to role and responsibilities, and 3% other.
That's reassuring, especially considering the personal share earlier on some of the changes I've seen in working from home earlier. But yeah, this makes sense. The health and safety concerns are definitely something that have been a big stressor. Even though maybe some of us are trying to focus on what we can control, there are things that still remain outside of our control. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next poll question, which is more related to your professional life. So what are some of the changes that have been impacting you the most professionally over the last several months?
Okay, and those folks are responding there. Again, if you're having issues, close the full screen mode, and we'll leave it open for maybe another 30 seconds or so.
Yeah, we recognize that there's probably lots of overlap between the personal and the professional, but maybe teasing out some of these professional changes will be helpful as we continue with the conversation.
Okay, so here 35% remote work, 32% restrictions to in-person contact, and then 14% for each team dynamics and responsibilities and changes in workload, and only 5% for other.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for participating in that. Yeah, the remote work shifts and the restrictions to in-person contact definitely have a big influence, especially when we're talking about the field of planning or any other profession where you're interacting with the public in order to complete or achieve the goal that you've set out for yourself, your organization has set out for itself. So we are going to transition back here to the presentation and just talk quickly about some of the challenges beyond just the maybe the more personal challenges, right? So at APA, we've been observing some of the topics that have been rising to the top. There are so many different news articles that are coming out, tweets that are coming across on our personal feeds or through different sorts of social media. But things like changes to transportation, concerns over how do the most vulnerable in our communities adapt to these changes, or seek shelter and healthcare in times when those things are so crucial for maintaining public health. We've also observed lots of conversations related to how people are moving, right? So if schools are shifting to more of an online engagement strategy, what does this mean for communities and for folks who are trying to juggle school and work from home, like we talked about in the previous poll? So all of these things, we're coming into our organization. We're seeing planners talk to one another across different platforms about how some of these things are impacting their communities. And so our organization took some steps to move forward with addressing some of these concerns. Oh, sorry, just to confirm, are you all able to see my screen? I'm seeing some changes on my end.
Hey, Joe, can you reopen your PowerPoint? We were locked in the poll for a second there. Okay, you have the input slide.
Okay.
Okay, sorry about
Yes,
that.
the input slide. No, you're good. Just wanted to confirm.
Go ahead.
Okay, so in case you all missed it, this was my challenges slide that pulled out some of the headlines that we were seeing, just one source of information that we were using at APA to identify what are some of the pain points that our members are experiencing. What are some of the ways that we could help as an organization? The transition that we observed, was kind of like a shift overnight. One moment we were in the office, the next we were working from home and trying to juggle a lot of these pressures. I remember hearing the expression "drinking from a fire hose," and so the actions that we've taken at EPA, specifically forming the solutions team, have been one way to kind of try to control some of that incoming information from a variety of sources and prioritize things so we can address them strategically. So how did we go about this? One of the primary ways was reaching out to our members and also listening empathetically and trying to understand where folks are coming from. We did launch a survey earlier on that gave us an impression for what were some of the direct changes that planners were seeing in their communities. So things like reductions in public engagement floated to the top, and changes to permit processes because things were put on hold while folks figured out what were essential services in their communities. We were also observing different conditions from around the country, right? So a lot of this information is coming in from our members alongside with updates in terms of how is COVID-19 impacting communities, where are folks increasing or decreasing regulations related to social distancing measures. And then in addition to that, we were engaging in thought leadership, right? So looking beyond some of the more immediate emergency considerations and thinking about, okay, well, how is this going to translate into more of a longer term changes for the profession? And so this is the thought leadership component is not something new. This is something that we were engaging in before COVID-19 hit. Specifically, we were looking at a couple of conversations in relation to disruptors and trends. So things like artificial intelligence, urban air mobility, those were conversations that prior to COVID-19 we were considering, and then COVID-19 came as a disruptor in itself, and now we're applying the considerations from this pandemic to a variety of different settings. So I mentioned the solutions team earlier. The solutions team was one of the responses that we've developed to try to make sense of this world that is changing overnight, every day, it feels like. Our solutions team is a combination of folks from a variety of departments at APA. We've got folks from communications, policy, and research. The graph that you see here, or illustration that you see here, is not representative of everyone who's involved in the process. It's definitely something that's taking place throughout the organization. But what we're doing is we're coming together to identify what are the different priority areas that are coming up through all the different channels and input sources, and then focusing on creating outputs that will help planners engage in conversations that maybe they might be less familiar with, or maybe they are familiar with, but because this is such a new challenge, they are less ready to tackle these things with solutions that are appropriate for what's going on during a pandemic, basically. Some of those topics include planning methods and tools, public engagement, economic impacts, and equity. There's many more that we have talked about, but these four are ones where we've been able to connect with folks from a variety of cities to create different outputs. We are focused on creating content that, number one, will meet the immediate response, or it will meet the immediate need in the planning community and with affiliated professions. But we're also interested in more of that in-depth response, where we are taking our time to identify what happens beyond the immediate solutions that a planner might be able to implement in their communities. And so, so far, what we've been able to produce include blog posts that highlight the ideas and solutions that are popping up across the U.S. We've got interviews in the form of podcasts, as well as micro content that we share across social media streams, and resources that we've identified, not just from APA, but also from entities that have a focus on the built environment and focusing on mitigating some of the impacts from the pandemic. For our in-depth response, we are focusing on creating content that allows folks to have a longer conversation, whether it's through educational content, panel discussions, and we are also focusing in on more long-term research projects where we are asking some of those questions and working on products over the next couple of months. Well, there's more information about these resources available to you all at our COVID resources page. There's a URL here on the side, planning.org/resources/COVID-19, and we will link to that at the end of the presentation so that you all have a little bit more information and you can see what are some of the other areas that we've talked about through our content creation process. All right, so with that being said, I'm going to dive into some of the 4 topics that we listed earlier and identify what are some of the things that are happening, what are the conditions, right, that we're observing, the connections between those conditions and the planning profession and also affiliated professions where appropriate, what has been our response within APA, and then also identifying some of the solutions that we've observed across the planning community. So really quickly, over the last couple of months, there has been a shift from, doing more long-term work into that emergency response timeline, right? So in many instances, planners are working with a planning horizon that might be beyond just the next couple of weeks. So we've been trying to focus on what's that connection between the immediate needs in our community, specifically in terms of public health and other sorts of community needs that are coming up because of COVID, and planner skill sets, right? We, as planners, have a variety of tools on our belt that can help us think beyond, okay, well, this is what the numbers are of, or this is the impact of COVID in our community over the last several weeks, and this is what we project for it to be over the next several weeks. Planners can think about more of that longer-term response in terms of, okay, well, what do we actually need in order to listen to our community members while we're not able to get together in public spaces? How do we continue going about public functions? And again, just moving beyond this emergency response into the next phase. And so what we've done is we have compiled different stories that folks have been willing to share with us in relation to planning activities, right? So lots of different communities around the country are taking innovative steps to address some of the needs that they're seeing. So one of those resources that we've come up with focuses on connecting planners with allied professions, right? So we recognize that it's not just planners working alone, but it is something where we're all, trying to connect with others to resolve challenges that we're seeing. The resource I've pulled here on the side specifically focuses on the connection between planning and public health. So we've compiled stories from folks who are working at that intersection of public health and planning to figure out, okay, well, what can we do right now? It's pretty clear that some communities might be overwhelmed with emergency response, but what can planners do from their end to either gather data or to share information with community members, which is kind of different from again, looking specifically at how COVID is spreading in communities. This specific resource talks about different considerations like food systems, transit, and other community needs that might be coming up, and how planners can help with those tools while the public health response is taking place. We've also seen a lot of interest around the conversation related to public engagement. So this is one of the top considerations that came up when we launched our survey to members. Lots of communities were seeing a halt on any sort of gathering of people just to mitigate the impacts of the pandemic. So we were hearing from folks who are using more innovative approaches to continue to be able to do their planning work, right? A lot of processes maybe had to be put on pause, but some things, say for example, planning commission meetings had to keep going. Other communities may have, approached this in a way that's kind of more just waiting to see what happens, but in places where they couldn't, we did see a lot of innovation and wanted to share that with our members. The innovation mostly focused on virtual engagement and identifying different ways of reaching out to the community. There were a variety of stories from around the country, many of which were recorded, or two at least, which were recorded in some of our products. We were thinking about how do practitioners in their communities actually go forward with some of these things. And some of the recommendations that came up included things like engaging in rehearsal with folks before actually transitioning to an online meeting, or figuring out how to harness social media to get the word out about these meetings that are happening, because folks might not be coming across information like they usually do and may not be aware of what's taking place in their community. So that was a really neat project because we did get to connect with folks who are on the ground thinking about these challenges. Social equity is another conversation that's come up, and there's a lot of this that's connected to the pandemic itself. There's a lot of it that's connected to more social unrest and recognition of challenges that disproportionately impact community members. So our solutions team has been focused on what's the planner's role here? How can planners use the tools that are at their disposal to think about more equitable futures for their communities? And so one of the activities that we've engaged in is figuring out what are our communities up to, right? So this is not very different from some of the other changes or some of the other solutions that we've talked about previously. But when we're seeing, challenges related to COVID health cases and death cases in their communities, we really do see that there is a need to talk about what are the challenges that are in the built environment for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and how is this impacting their public health. So one of those examples, we were able to connect with leaders across the country. This specific resource here, we were able to interview Sam Zappa, who's in the city of Seattle. And Seattle's making some interesting changes to their planning practice to help address some of those challenges that they're seeing in their communities. Some of these examples may translate to other cities. It might give planners ideas for what could work in their communities. And hopefully what we're aiming to gather here are those translatable lessons for folks. Economic impacts is another area where we have focused our attentions, right? We're seeing changes to different industries in terms of, who's being impacted. This is a chart here that was published last week by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics on unemployment rates up until July 20th. So we've seen it. We saw a significant spike in April, and things have started to come down at least up until July. But there's still a role here for planners to help supplement some of those challenges that are happening, or to help address some of those challenges that are happening in their communities. The solutions team has focused on identifying some of these strategies, specifically thinking about planners who are working at the local scale. And one of those resources, before I tell you about the resource, it's important to note too that planners are being impacted by some of the changes in the economy. We have seen concerns related to budget changes at the municipal level. Those are things that are stressors for folks that we're interacting with. This chart here shows some of the challenges across different industries, and it shows that local governments continue to see declines in employment, even though maybe some other industries are seeing inclines, at least in May of 2020. So this is a resource I wanted to talk to you all about. We've identified 6 different actions that planners can take within their own communities to begin to address some of the economic challenges that they're seeing. Just to wrap up here and give some space for Petra to talk about some of our foresight practices, I'd like to just quickly recap. We understand that the world is changing pretty quickly, and planners are having to adapt with those situations as well. As APA, as part of the solutions team, part of what we can offer and are really striving to do is to connect the different trends that we're seeing to the profession itself, and better understand how can planners continue to be relevant in these conversations moving forward, and how can we showcase that, yes, even though it's not an emergency response, or plans typically don't fall under that emergency response framework, this is how we can supplement some of the actions of folks who are engaging in those conversations. We'll continue to monitor development, discuss trends, and present that information to our members so that they can better prepare. And then also develop guidance for navigating these changes. It's not just about showcasing what's going on, but also thinking critically about what's actually feasible for folks who are working at different levels of planning within their communities. And so this last piece here, shifting from that immediate response to foresight practice, is something that Petra will share more with us under the prepare and watch and learn section of this presentation.
Thank you, Jill. So obviously a lot has been going on in the last 5 months, just been a lot of change. And before I talk about the next 2 timeframes in our foresight process, I'd like to talk a little bit more about the approach itself and the goals we're pursuing with our foresight practice. So the process is really meant to be a process of learning with the future. So we are not predicting the future, and I'm sorry if that's disappointing now, because maybe that's what you expected, but we're really not predicting the future. We want to learn with it. And so this is not about creating certainty necessarily, but it's about developing a plan to learn. What do we need to watch out for, and what do we need to prepare for? Another important distinction to what we usually do in planning is also this is not about creating a vision. So usually we as planners, we look into 10-year horizons of what is the perfect vision of how should our community look like in 10 years. This is not what we're doing in foresight practice. It's really more about understanding the things that we can't control and that will shape our operating environment, and understanding them better and preparing for them. So it's almost like a blurry vision that we are looking here, almost like an impressionist painting that we need to make sense of before we can really dive into it and understand what it is about. So it's a 2-step process that we are looking at here. The first one is so-called sense making. This is really about connecting trends and disruptors to what planners actually do. So it's, for example, when we look at trends like artificial intelligence, that might mean a lot, but it's really important for us to understand how is it connected to planning, what changes is it gonna bring in cities and communities. The classic example is, who would have thought in 2004 that a telephone would disrupt how we do pretty much anything in life? And then in 2005, the iPhone came out. So that's all about sense making. The second step is the so-called meaning making. And that's really to provide guidance and thought leadership on how to navigate these trends, these disruptors, and these uncertainties. Next slide. So for this, we're looking at 5 categories of trends. And I added some examples here. Obviously, these lists are not exhaustive. But we're looking at societal trends, we're looking at technological trends, economic trends, environmental trends, and political trends that are impacting cities and communities and that are impacting how planners do their work. Now, these trends have specific relations with the disruptors that we're experiencing. And so we identified 4 types of trends. There are existing trends that will continue and may get to a point of disruption in the future. For example, there's a trend that we have an aging population. There's a trend that we have a growing diversity in the US population. Now, how will these trends continue, and will they lead to disruption if we don't prepare for them? Then there are existing trends that got disrupted or accelerated by disruptors, for example, COVID-19. So an example there is the digitalization. That is a trend that has been around for a long time, but it really got accelerated because of COVID-19. Similar with the shared economy, it has been building over the last decade, but it got really disrupted with COVID-19. The third type is new trends where we, or maybe others, see potential impacts or disruption in the future. So that's where, for example, artificial intelligence falls in, or autonomous vehicles. And then the fourth type is potential new trends that are resulting from current disruptors, such as COVID-19. So for example, right now we look at a lot of cities that started these temporary shared streets, using streets for leisure activities. And the big question, could this become a new trend that becomes permanent? Now, for using our foresight practice in times of COVID, we are mainly focusing on existing trends that got disrupted or accelerated by COVID, and potential new trends that may result out of this disruption. Now, looking at this from the perspective of our time cone, it's really interesting how some of the trends that we would have located in the watch and learn time frame, or maybe in the prepare time frame 6 months ago, suddenly moved immediately into the act time frame. So for example, we've been talking about e-commerce and its impact on communities. We've been talking about the trend to work remotely and the future of office space, but it didn't require immediate action necessarily. But today it's like, yeah, we need to act on that. Similar with the idea of e-planning and virtual meetings. Yeah, we talked about it, it was somewhere in our minds, but it wasn't an immediate urgency, and it became an immediate urgency during these times of COVID. So that's how these trends move around in our time cone. Now, for this presentation today, I'd like to give an example of a trend that got accelerated by COVID-19. And we're currently looking at about 100 different trends. So unfortunately, we won't be able to dive deeper into all of them. I also want to say that I will probably offer more questions than answers about potential future scenarios. But again, the goal here is really to think about different components that might shape our blurry vision of the future, and also to identify what are the things we need to watch, what do we need to prepare for, what do we need to learn more about. And so for today, for this presentation, I picked the topic of digitalization and its connection to COVID-19. So we all know COVID-19 forced us to stay at home. And the emergency response to that was to move pretty much every aspect of life online. And the level of digitalization we were at that point enabled us to continue with our lives, to do our work, to go to school, to do our shopping, to watch concerts, and so on. 30 years ago, this scenario would have looked completely different. Now, of course, not everyone can work remotely, so there are still many people who have to go to work every day. And the question on how they might be impacted by this trend is a whole other story. So we're not going to look at that right now. On top of that, many people don't have access to good internet, or they might not be able to afford internet at all. And so the impacts of the digital divide got even bigger and more severe here, because when all aspects of life are suddenly online, you can't participate in life. You can't work from home. Your kids will miss out on school and education. That's a problem. And now, obviously, as a planner, I'm asking the question, what is the future of land use in this scenario? How can I make sense for planners and also other built environment professionals out of all this? And yeah, it really seems like people are getting pretty comfortable with this live, work, play situation at home. So let's take a closer look at this. Now, yeah, we're starting to move into our prepare and watch and learn time frames here on our time cone. And the question really is, what direction will this disruption or this acceleration of the digitalization take in the future? And you can see here there are some studies, and there are many of them with many different results, but most of these studies let us assume that some people may never return to an office. Some businesses will never open the doors of their brick and mortar stores again. And in general, there's a lot of confusion in the real estate markets right now. Interestingly, a McKinsey study told us that nowadays real estate agents are talking more to psychologists or technologists or futurists than with the usual market analysts, which is a really interesting development, and it shows us how much uncertainty there is. So, next slide. As I said in the beginning, I will have more questions and answers for you, but it's really important for us to look at these questions and inform our way for preparing for this future and to see what we need to watch here. So if this live, work, play happens in one place, essentially, and that is home, one of the questions is, what will happen to our neighborhoods and what will happen to downtown? Throughout the last 5 months, we discovered a lot of deficiencies already in our neighborhoods, things that are missing there right now if we spend 24 hours a day there. So for example, we are used to, get our lunch somewhere when we are working. We're used to get our takeout coffee. Now, does this mean that we will have to add these amenities to our neighborhoods? We also realize that we have a lack of green space in our neighborhoods. And the next big question will be, if all of that moves from downtown into neighborhoods, what will happen with downtown? Now, obviously, there are thoughts of potential obsolete spaces for retail and obsolete spaces for office space. Not all retail and all office space will go away, but there will probably be some changes in the future. Now, also looking at the fact that we have a lack of green space and the housing crisis we're all experiencing, the lack of affordable housing. Could there be a solution? Maybe, we don't know yet. Also, another big question, will people move out of the city? A lot of cities are asking that question right now. Is it maybe not attractive anymore to live in a city? The fear of density. And ultimately, does location still matter if everything is online? So all of these questions obviously will depend a lot on many other trends that are surrounding us. And I'm just going to name a few. We talked about social inequalities. The digital divide is a huge problem there. Affordable housing is an issue. How can you work from home if you don't have a home? And trends like an aging population. We don't know how are elderly people responding to digitalization. So there's still a lot of unanswered questions there. Also, when we look at the current recession, how will it affect that? How fast can we recover from it? Trends like artificial intelligence and automation. What are the expected impacts on the workforce and jobs there? And then obviously also when we look at environmental trends, climate change. How will climate change impact our choice on where we can live? I could go on and on and on, but I'm looking at the time, so I will move to the next slide here. Maybe a similar example quickly from the transportation sector. Similar situation with COVID forcing us to stay home and the digitalization enabling us to do that. Obviously, no matter what mode of transportation you look at, mobility went down. And the interesting thing here is when you look at the destinations we wanted to go to during this time, no one or less people had to go to work. Less people had to go do their shopping at the store because everything was online. But there is a big increase in how many people actually wanted to go to find parks, to find green space, to restore. And also here we have another equity issue when we look at how many people don't have access to parks, which is another deficiency in how our neighborhoods are planned right now. Now, when we look at the next slide, in the spring, in March and April, we were all positive and optimistic, thinking this is now the time to change how we do mobility here, how we move around town, setting up this moment for active transportation. But when we look at the numbers today, we see that the vehicle miles traveled in the US are almost back to the levels where they were before COVID hit. And of course, a lot of this is balancing out public transit because with physical distancing, it's really hard to be on a train. So a lot of people went back to driving. Now, looking at the future of transportation and the big question, what is the future of transportation? If we go to the next slide, we don't know. We don't know. There is obviously right now, there is an uptick in private motor vehicles. There is a decrease in public transit use and an increase in walking and biking. No one knows right now what's going to happen with shared mobility. And again, all of these things are also influenced by these 5 types of trends that are around us. And I'm not going to go into more detail here now, looking at the time. But if we go to the next slide, just summing all of this up, coming back to where we are today, when we were trying to flatten the curve for COVID-19, we learned that our cities and communities were not built for the necessary actions that we needed. So speaking about physical distancing and shelter in place. Many of us were not prepared for this. And in addition, we found additional deficiencies in our world, in our cities, in our communities that have surfaced during this time. Now, at this very moment, we're figuring out what are temporary fixes, what could become a permanent, sustainable solution. But at the same time, we need to consider these external forces that are not going away. And so there are really more curves that need to be flattened and not just the COVID-19 curve. And that includes the curve of social inequalities that's going up, the curve of climate change that's going up, and the curve of the economic downturn that's obviously going down. So those are all curves we need to flatten here. Now, if we talk about the phase of recovery during this time, there's a few things we need to look at and prepare for. So first of all, and Joe mentioned it earlier, we need to understand the planner's role in all of this. How can we make sure that planning is an essential job? We also need to learn how we can do more with less. Obviously, the budgets, the government budgets are down. We need to tighten our budgets. How can we prepare for that? And then from a lot of the things that we've learned, we need to prioritize equity. And that's not just about foresight. That's really about hindsight, learning about the mistakes of the past and learning about how we can correct them. It's about insight, which is about listening and understanding. And it's about foresight, choosing the right path forward. In addition to that, we need to find ways to upskill planners. Looking at the watch and learn timeframes, there's a lot of trends and a lot of things in the future that planners are not necessarily prepared for. Talking about artificial intelligence and other technological innovations, there is not a lot of content in our curricula for planning studies right now. So how can we prepare planners to become more knowledgeable about these things that we're expecting in the watch and learn timeframes? Now, looking at all of this, obviously, there's no normal anymore. But what we want to go towards is really to make equitable, sustainable, and resilient cities and communities the new normal. And I have a little advertisement here on the right for our policy conference in September, where we will talk about a lot of these things here on this slide. So save the date on that one. Now, the title of this webinar is COVID-19 and the Future of Planning. And here's now the slide about the future of planning and what we make out of everything that we've been observing in combination with all these other trends that are out there and might be unrelated to COVID-19. But the things that we're seeing and the things that we are learning is obviously future literacy and strategic foresight are becoming more and more important. Planners have always been looking into the future, but there's also this planning for uncertainty that needs to allow certain agility. It might not be the right thing anymore to look into what's going to happen in 10 years or to plan from a today's standpoint on what should be happening in 10 years. We have to include in our work all the trends and things we see in this blurry, or that we try to learn about in this blurry vision. So design thinking and agility are becoming more and more important. We want to start smaller, fail fast and fail small, which will help public budgets to not lose too much if it fails, if it doesn't align with what happens in 10 years, if someone invents the next iPhone. So the question really, are the methodologies that we are using still up to date? Can comprehensive plans and zoning be agile? The next thing, systems thinking and scenario planning. Those are things that we already do as planners, and we really need to use them more and more so we can plan for multiple futures, for uncertainty, and think in different systems that are surrounding us. We also need to work more with diverse teams. Diverse perspectives are really important when you practice foresight. You want to have this outside of the box thinking. You want to include scenarios that no one might have thought of. In order to get those, you need diverse teams to work with. We also want to be inclusive. Everyone should be heard here, but we need to be fact-based, which is becoming more and more difficult in times of fake news. And then last but not least, I talked about technology earlier. We need to get more involved in technology also when we look at the whole idea around smart cities. If planners want to keep spearheading the work in city planning, we need to understand the technologies better that are out there, the technologies that we see in the watch and learn time frame, and learn about them. But at the same time, where I really see the role of the planner is we need to keep a people-centric approach. So when we talk about smart cities and similar developments, it's not about implementing technology for technology's sake. It's implementing technology for the people who live in our communities. And with that, I think we got to the end of our presentation. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Great, thank you. And we'll ask you to turn on your webcam so we can see you during the Q&A. And you can see there that we do have your email addresses as well as coursplanning.org think many of our planners online today are members of APA, as well as the COVID-19 website there for folks to look for resources. So we gotten a lot of questions. You can continue to ask them through the questions tab, and we'll do as many as we can. We have about half an hour. We might go over a little bit more than that. I guess there's so much uncertainty we're talking about today, and I appreciate all the work that you've been doing and the others at APA. But one of the questions we had, do we have any sense yet about what we think is permanent here and what we think is temporary? I know it's kind of a big question, but almost as having your sense of it from having looked at this information and thinking about it.
I think it really depends on what exactly we're talking about. I mean, we see already some cities that made some changes permanent, such as shared streets and converting streets to public space for leisure experience. For example, Seattle is an example there that just converted 20 miles of street to permanent shared streets or public space. There's so many other, things that we really don't know what will be permanent, what is just a temporary fix. I mean, also when we look at the whole situation with who's working from home right now, and all these studies that we're looking at are just, how people feel about this right now and how they enjoy working from home. But ultimately, it's their employer who will decide if this is actually going to be possible. Although we are also reading at the same time that for employers, it will be more and more important in the future to offer that, because that, is an add-on to the attractiveness of the company and if people actually want to work there. So it depends a lot on the individual, but it also depends a lot on other factors. I mean, we have an election coming up in the US in November. The political will and the political direction this country will be going will also be a big impact on how some of these changes that we're seeing right now will develop in the future.
I think some of the things that we're seeing right now that might have been different from before will be helpful to continue. For example, the conversations related to social equity, that's something that ideally we would see go beyond just beyond COVID-19 time, right? We're having to pay closer attention to how is the built environment and other systems in place in cities impacting all of our residents, and what are some innovative solutions that can actually help residents. I think it'll be interesting to see which of those solutions stick, depending on the community, and as Petra mentioned, some of the other changes like upcoming elections and whatnot. But continuing to have that conversation and to normalize this idea that we do need to consider all members of the community and what access they might have to urban planning solutions and benefits is probably going to be helpful for us overall. Hard to say, though, if it's something that will be sustained. I personally hope that it is something that we'll continue to do.
A lot of that also depends on where we are in the flattening of the curve. I mean, I think in the US we're still in the first wave, or is it a second wave already? I don't even know. But, other places are already in different places with their COVID situation, and they probably have more certainty about certain things. Did people go back to work now that, the COVID situation got a little better, or did they stay? So they probably have already a better sense of where this might be going. But because we're still really in this first wave here in the US, it's still kind of a similar situation of what it was in the spring.
Okay, thanks, Petra. So it's very interesting, the range of questions today, I guess, given the broadness of the topic, but I'll start with this one also. And it's from Aaron Henson, who's in Oregon. And he says, I'm seeing a huge increase in workload. I work in current planning, and development is surging in my city of 100,000 in Central Oregon. Are other current planners seeing this kind of increased workload? I'm definitely drinking from a fire hose.
Early on, sorry, I think I interrupted.
Go ahead, Joe.
Okay. early on when we launched a survey to our members to get a better understanding of what are the challenges that you're dealing with, some of the folks mentioned that a lot of things hit pause or hit the brakes really quickly. And so folks who are thinking more in the long term share their concern about whether there would be an influx in responsibilities once things started to get back to normal. Petra mentioned this idea of having to do more with less, and that is something that we've heard from planners while compiling stories that we can share with our residents, right? It's that all these shifts in community priorities and restrictions in budget are stretching people thin, and who knows what the future will hold in terms of whether there'll be more capacity to bring on additional planners to take on some of this work. But it's something that, although I don't have information right now to confirm that lots of other planners are going through it, it is something that folks were worried about in the beginning, and now we're seeing that perhaps it is happening in some parts of the country.
What we've also seen is that, especially in the beginning, a lot of planners were used for other emergency response activities that are not necessarily related to planning. And obviously the work, still piled up in the meantime. So coming back to the office and then having double the work because you had to, deal with other stuff in the meantime, obviously didn't help. Another thing that we probably all experience, not just planners, is with this working from home situation and the idea that no one's really going on a vacation or anything like that, it seems like we can just, add and add and add and really doing more of less, but maybe too much of everything. And the uncertainty about the future doesn't help there. And one thing that we've been really taking care of at APA, because it's really important for our mental health also, is really checking in with people, making sure people take vacation, even though you might not be able to travel, because this is like the perfect recipe for burnout. You're in the same environment all day. You get out of your bedroom into the living room or wherever your laptop is sitting, and you start working earlier than usual because you don't have your commute to work. And then you just keep working because, well, you're at home anyways and your laptop is already there. And that's just really dangerous. So we keep reminding people at our staff to really make sure, take a break, take vacation, because it's just burning people out.
Okay, thanks, Petra. And we did actually get a couple comments here that folks are feeling similarly in terms of their jobs. Okay, next question here is from Vanessa Spartan, who says, what can APA do to make the planning profession more valuable to non-planners? For example, my city is currently doing emergency response, recovery, and equity work. We have several dozen planners spread across several departments. However, there are no planners involved in these community change discussions. Planners are left out. It appears that the planning profession is losing value in the eyes of other professions. As a starting point, planners should be central to citywide strategic planning and strategic management. However, urban planning education does not focus on this.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's something that we are aware of. It is a problem, and it is something that we have been discussing a lot, and APA is also currently working on our new strategic plan for the next couple of years, and this is definitely one of our priorities to figure out the value of planning and to communicate that the right way. Because sometimes we plan ourselves, struggle in explaining what are we actually doing, and we're doing a lot, and we are having all kinds of different roles as planners. And for us at APA, it's really going to be a priority to find that communication that we need to explain the value of planning to others, also including the upskilling of planners and figuring out what are some of the skills that we will need in the future to stay relevant. So it is a very important topic for us. It is a big concern for us, and it is something that is definitely one of our priorities over the next years.
I think to add to that, we recognize this need to build capacity, but also to advocate for oneself. I'm going to take off my research hat and try on the policy hat for just a quick second. but we do talk a lot about how these folks communicate the needs that they're seeing in their communities at higher levels, right? So it's not just at the local level, but beyond. If there's maybe more of a national conversation happening related to, okay, well, what are the needs that we're seeing in communities across the U.S.? And are there abilities to get funding for those sorts of priorities? And that's definitely something that can help elevate the profession. I guess I'll just come back to Petra's pitch earlier of the Planet Advocacy Conference that's happening later, where folks will be talking about what are some of the needs of this community. Connecting with planners on those topics is definitely something that can help us feel connected, even though many of us might still be distant from one another.
Okay, I just wanted to share a couple of the responses to the workload question, because I know we had talked about possibly sharing some responses today. So Dina Mooney says, just in response to that question, code administrators in our office in Wisconsin are seeing a decade high of permits being issued. GIS staff is strapped with the avid COVID-19 mapping. And then we have another comment with respect to workload issues. I definitely see an increase. However, I attribute most of this due to our lack of management tools and processes, and that we are way behind the curve in using technologies to communicate, share, and manage. So just a couple comments there to follow up on that. Here's a question,
yeah, maybe,
I guess. Go ahead.
Sorry, maybe one thing, because that's really, and we mentioned it many times, doing more with less. We have some resources on that on our website. I'm also happy to send the link separately. Michael, maybe that can be sent to some of the people that ask these questions. But there are resources on our website for some of these management and strategic planning and doing more with less. There are some processes that can be used to help that effort. So there are some resources available, and we're obviously working on more depending on the needs.
Okay, thanks. And will you be able to share the PowerPoint with us so we can put it on our page?
Yeah, of course.
Your slide deck? Okay, excellent. A number of people asked that question. Okay, another question here is from Robert Brown, kind of in the similar vein. While no one wants to bring up job losses, especially in our field of planning, however, an interesting question today would be relative to concerns over the immediate future of our profession. Have there been layoffs or furloughs? And what percentage of those on the line are concerned about their future? What percent of those on this call are government versus private sector? If folks want to respond to that, we can definitely share that information with Petra and Joe. But I don't know if you've heard anecdotally or anything that you're tracking over at APA about this so far.
Yeah, I'm not aware if we are necessarily tracking the numbers of planners being laid off or furloughed, but we know it is a concern, and it is related to the question of the value of planning and how to communicate that the right way. And we've seen that already during the recession in 2008, 2009. Planners are usually the first ones to go, because obviously the engineer is valuable because they know about engineering, and others have other specialties, and no one understands the value of planning. So it's been on our radar, as I mentioned earlier. It's also something that our colleague in our career services department are looking into, on how we can, help planners right now when they get furloughed, on how they might be able to, change to different opportunities that might not necessarily be the planner in the municipality, the planner in the public sector. Obviously, there's private sector planners that do many different types of things, and our career services colleagues are really looking into that, on how can we help planners to maybe make that transition during times where government budgets are low and the possibility of getting hired anytime soon are relatively low as well. And what are the areas right now where planners can and should play a role, and how can we help them with that transition there?
Okay, thank you. Next question here says that you touched a little bit on this during the presentation, but do you know of examples of planners using their skill sets for unusual COVID-related tasks?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, we heard from some planners that they were used for emergency management tasks that were not necessarily related to planning. I don't know right now what exactly the tasks were that they were working on. I don't know, Joe, if you heard some more details on that.
Well, one of the tools that comes to mind is that interview with Sam Asefa that we talked about briefly. There were conversations related to not just thinking about strategic planning, but how to present data to folks who right in the moment. Sam Asefa discussed the connection between demographers who are part of their team and some of the needs that were happening in the community. I think there was a lot of interest around the conversation related to access to food. And this is something that, again, popped up earlier on in the conversation while we were checking the pulse with folks at the beginning of the pandemic. But it would be interesting to see how things have changed, especially not just access to food, but access to housing and different resources. One other thing that's coming to mind is support for small businesses and trying to tackle those challenges in ways that are more innovative and perhaps more personal than before. So how do you actually build relationships with folks in the community in a way that's more one-on-one in comparison to the previous efforts that maybe were more of a blanket approach or still personal, but not maybe as personal. I would recommend checking out the resources on our COVID-19 page for more ideas on what folks are doing differently.
Okay. Yeah, so just to clarify, we have a webinar archive page, which will include the link to the recording today and the PowerPoint, as well as if you want, if there's anything that you wanted to share on that page beyond links, let us know and we can do it there. But obviously, especially for the APA members, there's a lot more available on the planning.org website. Next one is a comment that perhaps you two could respond to because it touches on some of these things we're talking about. And that is, childcare is essential. Women with kids have had a difficult time working from home with kids. Research papers published by men have gone up while those published by women have gone down, and gender equity is important. So a way for planners that we can kind of respond to this?
Yeah, I mean, gender mainstreaming obviously is something that relates a lot to planning, and there's a lot of things in our cities and in communities in general where there's still a lot of inequities towards women. So when we talk about equity and inequities, it's about all kinds of different population groups. Planning profession has the same issue that a lot of other professions have. That means the default is usually the white male, and that's an issue because obviously the population is much more diverse. So that includes not just, the issues women have to deal with, but also, younger people, the elderly, racial inequities, and the full spectrum. Talking about gender issues and gender mainstreaming, that's something that we've also looked more into over the last months. We put out a few publications on this, and in addition to that, one thing that APA is also seeing a priority in over the next years is, the whole equity topic in general. Obviously, there's a lot to learn from the past and a lot of things to correct, and the planning profession is one of the professions that is deeply involved in some of the things where we are today in that respect. And so that said, for example, what we are doing at APA now is really integrating equity in everything we do. Also for us in the research department, we're trying to not just look into, what are the teams we're working with, but also really what is the content that we're focusing on, what are the audiences we're looking at, how do we use methodologies like interviews and others, and how can we create more diversity to essentially get to an outcome that's more equitable. Obviously, everything from childcare to professional life to whatever else is part of your life, it's always women who are, impacted more if you have family and kids, and that's something that needs to change. And there's a lot that can be done in the built environment, and that can be changed in the built environment and how things are done to make that easier.
One of the things that we encourage planners to consider in their work is this idea of collecting information that can be disaggregated by gender. Of course, there's lots of other approaches that can happen, but having data to support what are some of the challenges that folks in their cities are experiencing can really help in terms of moving forward with priorities that might be more representative of the community, right? So if there are opportunities for us to continue to look at what's happening in our cities during COVID-19 and how can we recover in a more just way, definitely consider what are some projects or some opportunities where we're interacting with the public and we can get information that supports, you know, the challenges that come up based on gender, based on race, on physical ability, and lots of other identity components that shape our everyday experience.
Okay, thanks, Joe.
Oh, it's not just going for disaggregated data, sorry, but also processing that data and incorporating it into your results. So it's kind of like a full circle there. Thank you.
Got it. Thank you very much. Okay, next question here is the APA working on identifying possible equitable engagement strategies with the digital divide in mind? This is a time to be innovative with engagement, but so many planners are struggling with ideas to confront this. Guidance from APA would be helpful to our field.
Yeah, definitely. So as I mentioned, sorry, go ahead, Joe.
No, go ahead, Petra.
No, I was just going to mention, as I said earlier, APA is currently working on our new strategic plan for the next years. And I mean, those of you who are APA members have noticed our focus on equity over the last years. We published a policy guide on how to plan for equitable communities. But there's more to come, and we're working very closely with our board right now and our members, and also with staff, of course, on, you know, how can we make it happen? You know, we don't want to just talk about it, we really want to do it. And for us, there's a lot of listening and learning involved right now. So we are aware that the planning profession is to blame in many of the inequities that are out there in our communities. And for us, it's really about learning, understanding what were the mistakes from the past, how can we correct them, listening to people, you know, that are more involved in those challenges, and really creating useful and effective guidance and things that will help our members and other planners to make it happen.
We see some interesting examples of innovation under our public engagement section of resources on the COVID-19 page. We also do have a research knowledge-based collection that's specifically focused on online engagement. And with those collections, we always approach it with an equity lens. So identifying what are some of those opportunities for innovation that maybe have worked in other cities and could translate to, or cities or communities and can translate to other spaces. I would, again, just recommend folks to consider reviewing the resources that are available through COVID-19, our COVID-19 solutions page, just because that does capture some of the more unique stories that have come across our way, and illustrate some of the successes and still some of the barriers that we're seeing, even with innovative approaches like using mixed modes to engage with people, whether that's like hosting a meeting where folks are gathering information over social media, or ensuring that telephone lines are open and ready to go to collect comments from folks. So yeah, definitely something where there's lots of work to be done, but if we pay attention to what others are doing, then perhaps there are some translatable lessons that can help the profession overall.
Great, thanks, Joe. Do you both mind if we go another 10 minutes or so? We've got many questions and still 825 people online.
Sure, no problem.
Great. Next question then, is APA going to offer training to practicing planners on future thinking?
Yes, yes, and yes. So Joe mentioned when we talked about the solutions team that it's mainly a collaboration between the research, the policy, and the communications departments. But of course, we also collaborate, talk with, and work with our colleagues in education and also in our career services. And all of this is connected. So as Joe also mentioned in the presentation, right now we focus on a lot of rapid responses and micro content, but we are moving into, creating educational material and creating tools and helpful input for career services. So yeah, definitely there will be more. APA Learn is our online learning catalog, and you will definitely see more on that in the future there too.
Okay, thank you. Next question here. APA has struggled for a long time with the notion of promoting the planner skill set. We are now in a period of heightened uncertainty about the future, including the erosion of confidence in previous visioning and forecasting techniques and information. What is APA doing to make relevant information and methods available at all planning scales?
Yeah, similar answer. Obviously we have APA Learn, our online learning catalog, where we offer all kinds of courses to all kinds of topics. A lot of that will, relate more in the future to how can we upskill planners in terms of technological knowledge, in terms of foresight processes, in terms of equity, and other topics that we see are important and where we see a need to upskill. Yeah.
One thing that comes to mind is this idea that we've been talking about within the solutions team of tapping into our divisions to better understand what are some of the priorities of folks who are experiencing specific sets of circumstances. So whether we're talking about equity or whether we're talking about rural communities or maybe folks who are working at the county level, for example, tuning in and listening to what folks are presenting as priorities in those spaces can help us better identify where we are, where we have opportunities to create content. So I would also encourage you all, apart from participating in the PAC conference that's coming up, consider also becoming engaged in your division or interest groups. There's lots of different options for folks based on lots of different factors, but that's one space where folks can share their perspective and then have that information, come back into the organization and shape the sort of content that we are producing.
Yeah, and that's actually a really important point that Joe just made, and probably something that I forgot to mention in my presentation about our foresight approach. What is really important here also is that it's not just APA staff working on all of these foresighted topics and analyzing trends and talking smartly about them. We are really, engaging, not just our staff, our leadership, but also our members, our divisions and interest groups, and really experts from outside of that. So we will rely heavily on especially external experts that can tell us more about some of these future trends that we might not even understand yet. So it's really an effort with the need to have diverse communities, we call them foresight communities, that will help us in this sense-making and meaning-making process. So it's not just APA. We're really looking at others to collaborate with us on this and help us figure out the future.
Okay, thank you. The next question here is as follows. We are planning to begin a 30-year vision for our community to align with the potential arrival of rapid transit and affordable housing goals. What are some arguments for going ahead now, and what are some arguments for delaying this 2 or 3 years?
Well, my first impression is, obviously those are important topics, that are related to problems that we're having right now in cities and communities, and that need to find solutions. What I'm always saying, especially in times of so much uncertainty that we are experiencing right now, it's really moving into more like a design thinking process where we taking things step by step. We take a break, we test, we see if it works out, we come back, have certain feedback loops and understanding what happened, did it work out or not. So we're not committing to a 30-year-long plan that, where we don't know what changes will occur along the way. So I would really encourage for those kind of undertakings to look into processes like design thinking that will help to start small, test small, but also fail small if it doesn't work out.
Okay. Next question, kind of similar in terms of what the community is dealing with. Actually, one of our colleagues here in Maryland. We are working on our comprehensive plan, included our areas that were developed as suburban office parks. The weakening office market already was throwing those areas into question, and our zoning is already a bit mixed use. But the evolution is spotty and odd, as townhomes ended up being in the middle of office buildings. Now COVID-19 is throwing office uses even more into question. The question is how to think about the future of office uses in this bizarre time. Do you have any insight?
Yeah, that's also one of the things that I mentioned earlier. It's how can we become more agile in planning? Because right now we really don't have the answer. We don't know how this whole office space situation is going to develop. We probably know that companies that are already suffering from the economic situation right now are probably not much into having big fancy offices that they won't be able to afford. And given the situation that we learned for a lot of these places, it's doable to do everything online. It is definitely a lesson learned where companies in the future will probably look in that aspect on how to save money. However, we don't know how much. We don't know how many of these companies will go that route. We also know that a lot of design firms and architecture firms have been working on these concepts for a long time on how to design an office space that is more flexible, where not everyone is always working at home. So that is something that's been on the radar for a while, that's already existing. So my guess is, depending on how the recession is going to go and what the economic development is in whichever community we're talking about, even if the demand might look like, just from a recovery standpoint, that there will be companies coming in and recovering, my guess is that the demand for office space in general might not go up that fast as it might have half a year ago.
Okay, thank you. We'll have a couple more and then we'll wrap up. One area of planning that COVID-19 has impacted greatly is public participation. What is your prescription for ensuring public participation in this era of virtual planning?
I can take that one on. I would love to be able to offer a prescription that works for everyone and, gets everyone involved, or at least to be aware of, okay, well, this is what's going on in my community. But the reality is that all communities are facing different sets of barriers and circumstances to engaging in these activities. We've talked to communities who have the ability to, collaborate with folks who are getting the word out, who are able to adopt new technologies and adapt quickly. And then there are other communities that may not have as much access to those resources. I think, broadly speaking, the key pieces to keep in mind is that it's okay to try something new and it's okay to try something different. Granted, there are some restrictions. If we're talking about public hearings, for example, there are certain sets of restrictions that go along with that. And we have our Planning and Law Division, actually, who provided some recommendations on how to approach those topics. For things like engaging the public in more long-term planning processes, providing different opportunities for folks to provide their perspective is so much, it's always important, but it's so much more important now in a time when lots of folks might experience challenges if they were to lose their home, thinking about, people who might not be interested in attending a socially distanced public engagement activity, for example. So in those instances, making sure that we're using tools that are at our disposal, like social media, also allowing for lower tech involvement, like again, being able to use telephone lines to call in and share perspectives and provide public comments. Those sorts of things are just as important as being able to provide a platform where folks can collaborate online if they have access to internet. So keep experimenting and record your process. What are your successes? And if there's anything that's specifically effective in your community, also please let us know. We would love to hear from you. And if it's something that included as some sort of content that might be able to help others who are in a similar predicament or might have the same question.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think the whole public engagement question has already been an issue before COVID with, how to get the people to go there, how to make it in a way that everyone can come time-wise and location-wise. And it's just getting, on the one hand, more complicated now with being in an online virtual world. At the same time, it also offers a lot of additional opportunities. And Joe already mentioned some of the types of media that can be used. And obviously, we talked about the digital divide and the issue that not everyone has access to internet. One solution that we also saw, and I forgot which city it was, it might have been Denver, where they just used the local TV channel to just broadcast it there. So it's really, as Joe said, there is no end to creativity on how, you can reach the people in your community, and you just have to find the right channels, the right media, the right stakeholders that can help you by collaborating on this.
Okay, thanks, Petra.
We often talk about, just one last thing. We often talk about muddling through. I think what we're seeing right now in the world of public engagement is a lot of people muddling through and recognizing that there's not going to be one perfect answer, but rather it's the effort that's important, and again, trying to do equitable engagement with folks. That's also a key piece of this conversation.
Okay, thanks, Joe. We've kind of been muddling through the questions here on my end today. Since we're at 2:42 and we have another COVID-related webinar in a couple of weeks that I'll mention in a second. I have one last question and then we'll wrap. So one person asked, is APA planning at this point for the next National Planning Conference to be done in person? Is that still too early to say?
It's too early to say. There's lots of conversations in the background, but yeah, we will obviously announce that as soon as we can say more about it.
Okay, understood. All right, well, with that, just wanted to give you a chance for some closing thoughts. I know we covered a lot of ground today, but I'm wondering if there's anything you want to leave us with.
Well, I guess, yeah, go first.
Okay. I think one thing that really popped up and continues to pop up in my work is this idea of connections between planning and everything else, right? Operating with different teammates from, different organizations, even from within the same organization, can lead to solutions that are often so much more innovative than perhaps some of the things that we can come up if we are insular. So my one thing to take away from this is to consider who haven't you worked with and what are some opportunities maybe to problem solve together. And if something works, let us know again, because we'd love to hear your story.
Yeah, and I can just, second that. There's obviously a lot of muddling through, which we planners are usually pretty good at. So I also think it's times of really being more forgiving. Like it's times of trying, and a lot of people have been trying different things in different work environments, and it's not always about the perfect solution. We are learning that at APA too, especially in the research department as researchers, where we usually do our 3-year research project and then there's one big report coming out. This is probably not how things will be going over the next month. It's more like little snippets, little steps, but ultimately we're all going to get there, and we are all in this together. We're all in this situation, so there's really no reason for looking for the perfect solution right now.
Excellent. That's a great point to end with. Well, we thank you very much today. And so with that, it'll conclude our webinar, COVID-19 and the Future of Planning. I'd like to offer a great big thank you to Petra and to Joe for a great presentation, to everyone who attended today, and to John Coleman, our communications and technology guru, who helps to make this all happen. The complete recording of today's webinar will be posted on smartgrowth.org on that archive page I mentioned, and we'll also include the PowerPoint there. Also, for those of you who have requested one, all attendees will receive an email that will contain a link to a personalized certificate of participation if that's useful to you. Please look for this follow-up email. When you exit from today's webinar, you'll be asked to participate in a short evaluation. Please take a few moments to provide feedback so that we can continue to improve the webinar experience for you. Keep an eye out on smartgrowth.org and your email inbox for details on other future webinars, including helping communities manage COVID-19, learning from age-friendly approaches with AARP and the National Main Street Center, which will be held 2 weeks from today, August 27th at 1 p.m. Eastern. Have a great day.